The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. On a Sabbath, Jesus went to dine at the home of one of the leading Pharisees. The people were observing Jesus carefully. He told a parable to those who had been invited, noticing how they were choosing the places of honor at the table. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not recline at table in the place of honor. A more distinguished guest than you may have to be seated, and having been invited by the host, invites both of you, but might have to say to you, "Give your place to this man." And then you would proceed with embarrassment to take the lowest place. Rather, when you are invited, go and take the lowest place, so that when the host comes to you, he may say, "My friend, move up to a higher position." Then you will enjoy the esteem of your companions at the table. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Then he said to the host who invited him, "When you hold a lunch or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your wealthy neighbors, in case they might invite you back as repayment. Rather, when you hold a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Blessed indeed will you be because of their inability to pay you back, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." The Gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. We have to appreciate the readings from the ancient books of the Scriptures. Today we look at something written like 150 years before Jesus from the book of SIRACH. It was practical information that the author was giving to a Jewish community living in a very Hellenistic Greek environment. They were moving away from their faith. They were moving away from their religious education, from the scriptures that they knew about, and they were going more into popular thought. Sound familiar? They were going into the popular thought of Hellenistic culture. So the book of Sirach and the author says, wait a minute, let's look at this from a different perspective. And he gives a very practical, down-to-earth process that all of us will do well to understand. Now, it's important that it relates eventually to the gospel, but let's get there first. First of all, conduct yourselves and your affairs with humility. In our society, think how contraindicated that is. You will be loved more than the giver of gifts, because a humble person gives glory to God. And then he goes on to say, basically, if you don't push yourself forward, maybe no one will push you forward, but maybe you will be held in esteem just because you're not pushy and you're not a show-off. That certainly relates to the gospel today. Jesus is as the house of a Pharisee, and all the eyes are on him. Now, Jesus knows Sirach. He knows the Old Testament. His father inspired the authors of the Old Testament. So Jesus is sitting down. Now, we have to put ourselves in first century. The process wasn't as like assigned seating as we know it. If you go into a banquet, you would get a place card and bring it, and somebody before you even came in determined where you're going to sit. It was first come, first serve, it seems. So what they would do is they would get there quick and sit close to the host. And those who came later would sit at the end. Now, Jesus is observing all this. I don't know where he was sitting, but he's observing all this shenanigans, who's pushing forward, who's pushing to get in front, who's pushing to be noticed. Maybe he or she came with fancy clothes and they have to show off their clothes. Jesus knows the human heart, don't forget. So while he sees this, he says, you should take a place down back. Take a lower place. Because think of the embarrassment you will experience if you're sitting right up there near the bride and groom and you don't belong there, and the host says to you, could you move down a little further? Now, you've done that here in church, right? How many Catholics, I don't know if they do it in Protestant churches too, but Catholics sort of own a seat, and if you're at the end, because that's your seat, somebody comes in, and how many times you give them a look because they want you to move down? It's not right. It's a little selfish. It's a little proudful. But it happens. So Jesus is saying, what if that happens and someone tells you to go sit in a lower seat? You're going to be embarrassed. When you go to a party, sit at the lower seat. And then maybe the host, you heard it, it's very clear, will invite you up forward. I got one phrase that Jesus is encouraging us to do. Eat dirt. We're talking about a banquet. Eating is appropriate, but dirt? The word for humility comes from the same origin of the word dirt. No, Jesus is not telling us to eat dirt. But I think that might be a good phrase for us to keep in mind when we're pushing ahead, when we're impressed with the stars or the politicians or the clergy who are out there in front being noticed. They should all, this is not a curse, they should all be eating dirt based on the scriptures. In other words, be familiar with the earth. Be familiar with humility. Be familiar with calming down, being close to the earth. And then he gives this great parable. And he talks to the host. And I know that you and I are not going to do this. When you're having a party, don't invite your rich relatives. Don't invite the neighbors who have money. Don't invite the popular people, because all of those people might pay you back. And that doesn't keep you close to the earth. That keeps you proud. That keeps you haughty. That keeps you being a show-off. Because look who's at my party. When you invite, go out into the streets and ask the beggar and the crippled and those who could never repay you to sit at your table. That's a great example he gives us, but you and I know in this society, in this city, we're not going to do that. Maybe little cities in the Midwest can do that. We can't do that necessarily. I think it's dangerous. So we got to take Jesus to the 21st century and try to understand, what is he telling me to do? Well, look what Pope Francis did a few months ago. Besides putting in showers in the Vatican for the homeless, and there are quite a bit, regrettably, even in Rome, he invited them all in for a particular meal, a big pizza party for the homeless. A great example of what all of us should be doing, one-shot deal. Knowing Francis, whose heart is very close to Luke's gospel, the gospel of poverty, he has already arranged, as you know, so many ways in which he could feed the poor, not himself only, but encourage the Diocese of Rome to feed the poor, open pantries, open the kitchens. So the important fact is that Jesus is telling us is to be comfortable with the poor. Be comfortable with bringing them closer to you. Very often, they are going to be our way to heaven. Don't forget, Jesus was the first immigrant. He had no place to hang his head. He had no place to sleep as a baby. He tells a story, the Son of Man has no place to rest his head. He's wandering, he's an immigrant, he's lonely at times. That's not so bad for us to know. It's important for us to know that this is our God, This is Jesus giving us these examples. So I don't feel comfortable, and I'm not going to invite and ask you to do something I wouldn't do, to invite a stranger off the street, a crippled, a beggar, to your home. But we've got to meet God somewhere in the middle. And I think dignity for the poor is number one. And sometimes we have to eat dirt. Sometimes we have to be humble enough to find out, how can I help the poor? I'm not representing any agency, so I'm not going to say, go to this church or that soup kitchen. You know where they are. And you know, as well as all of us know, that they need help. Whether financial donations, whether food donations, or whether roll up your sleeve and serve food donations. God came to us as a homeless baby in Jesus Christ. When Jesus sees all this competition as to who's going to get ahead, I think he's sort of sad in his own time when he saw this and the Pharisees were watching him. So we update our faith and we say, what can I do in the 21st century to be a Christian who loves the poor as Jesus would, who does things that Jesus would do, but we can't cross the boundary that doesn't provide a safe environment for us. And maybe some will criticize me for not saying, oh, you got to invite you open your doors to the poor and invite everybody in. It's not going to be that easy. My pantry won't have enough food for everybody, I can tell you, because I don't like shopping. So, and I don't like cooking. So I'd probably be one of those people on the outside looking in. But I think every one of us in our conscience has to ask ourselves, what can I do? I'm here at the table of the Lord. I'm here at the banquet of God in the flesh. He came to us, and especially through Luke's gospel, he's teaching us how to respect and understand the poor. He's blessing me with grace. He's blessing me with the strength to understand the faith, to do something about the faith, to live the gospel. It's a challenge, and not mincing words, but it's a pain in the neck. But that's Jesus. Jesus wants us to know what it's like to be a person who loves without boundaries. Jesus wants us to know what it feels like to eat dirt, not literally out of the garden, but to get in touch with humility. Jesus wants us to know what his Father did in the beginning of creation. Created all of us from nothing. The scriptures also say, out of dirt. They're not accidents. SIRACH didn't come up with these ideas because he wanted to be a good guy being spoken about in the 21st century. He was a man of faith, and he absorbed the Jewish culture and gave it back to us, the Jewish community, and we've absorbed that and incorporated it into the fulfillment of the gospel in Jesus. When you go home tonight or tomorrow, and you sit down for your meal, of course, thank God that we have food in front of us. And then ask, how can I eat dirt today and share with the poor? What can I do at the parish, the local soup kitchen, in my own neighborhood? Is that lady next door that I know is alone and feeble and not a danger, you think she'd accept my invitation? You think she'd accept a piece of my meal? Maybe I'll cut her half the casserole. Practical, local. And when we do that, whether we're feeding in the soup kitchen, bringing food, donating, or sharing of our own table, we're doing it with Jesus. Jesus is thanking us. Jesus is accepting for us. And Jesus is sharing with his sisters and brothers, the poor.